So our two speakers today, they're actually researchers from NDSU who have been doing some research on the entrepreneurial ecosystem here in Fargo for the last couple of years. It's Josh and Marineau and Nordstrom. And they've been collecting an inventory of the culture, the networks, and the underlying support system that supports the entrepreneurial ecosystem. So let's welcome to the stage Annalie and Joshua as they present their findings for us today.
It's kind of ironic. Annalie and I prepared pretty much the same number, but I don't see any point.
Yeah.
So I think the most difficult part about this research, at least for me, wasn't getting the grant from Kaufman or the 2 years of work. It was trying to figure out how to do this in 6 minutes. So hopefully we'll get close. Our project is investigating the entrepreneurial ecosystem in Fargo. It's something that we thought would be very interesting and important, especially since we're a couple of blocks from the epicenter of the action. For our presentation today, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the factors we found that contribute to the success of the ecosystem and how entrepreneurial activity is enhanced, or how the ecosystem actually helps that. And we're going to hit some high points and kind of give you some takeaways at the end. So hopefully we'll have lots of questions. All right, so the process, real briefly. We started with a number of interviews, about 50 or so, and we did a lot of attendance at different events like 1Million Cups. We tried to get as involved as we could, kind of in the background observing things. We had hundreds, if not thousands, of pages of transcripts, and we ended up developing a survey that we collected from 62 people, so we could be here in the room. From the survey, we did a bunch of data analysis, which we're still working on. We kind of present some of that. And we have some academic papers, and we've already done some presentations at national conferences. So that's where we are. This image that you see here is a network map. So this is sort of my area of research where I look at how things are connected to other things. In this case, these are people that are the dots, and the arrows and the lines are who mentioned who in the interviews. So just to give you an idea, a few people are mentioned often and other people are still mentioned. This kind of give you an idea of what I'm going to show you next, which is a little more complicated version of a network. So the sample itself, we had a majority of men, and by 60-40% in terms of our sample. Overall, 550 people are going to be represented in the data set today. What I found interesting about this is that the proportion of entrepreneurs within the male and female populations was about the same proportion, about 30%. I thought was actually quite interesting. We were surprised by that. There is a majority profits, there's nonprofits, and almost everybody in our sample, about 95%, were from Fargo, North Dakota. So most of the people that you're going to see here are Fargonians. Is that a word? We'll say it. Most of our sample is entrepreneurs, about 30-some-odd%. So the people that you see in the images that I show you are going to be majority entrepreneurs. There's CEOs, academics. Academics we're defining as people in administrative positions like the tech park folks. Educators that I'll show you or talk about are like Annalie and I, people that are faculty or teachers. We have CEOs, executives, a whole number of range of people, venture capitalists, etc. So a very broad spectrum, which you would expect from an ecosystem. So the first image I'm going to show you here is collaboration. So much like the network I just showed you, collaboration here, each line is a person who said they collaborated with somebody else in the ecosystem on entrepreneurial endeavors. The orange dots are the actual entrepreneurs. So you can see they're very well integrated into the ecosystem. Entrepreneurs are collaborating at a very high rate. They are involved. And this is a great thing. We're pretty much going to be sharing good news with you, things that we found that are excellent. Not represented here very well are educators, for instance. Academics, so tech park, very well integrated, connected, and connecting. Entrepreneurs are connecting other people. Nonprofits are connecting at a higher rate than profits. And we looked at friendships. Who's friends with whom in the ecosystem? This is important for social support, trust, cohesion, all those things that make a community cohesive. Very critical. And entrepreneurs, again, are very well connected in friendships. They have a slightly different profile in terms of friends. They're much more likely to be connected closely to people different than from themselves. So entrepreneurs tend to connect to people that aren't entrepreneurs, which is actually good news as well. And this is an organization by organization collaboration. So this is aggregating up to the organization level. How are the different entities within the ecosystem connecting to one another? Again, this is a cursory overview, but we see there's a lot of collaboration, but there's some primary organizations you would probably suspect. Emerging Prairie is one, the Tech Park, NDSU actually is quite involved. Other organizations like the the Fargo EDC and Folkways, there's a lot of organizations that are doing an excellent job. Given all of this, one important factor I want to mention is that the resiliency of this network, of this group of people that are connected, is very high for friendship and collaboration. Meaning if you took the most connected person out of that network, the network is going to still exist. It's still going to function quite well. That's not as true for the organization network here. We take these primary players out, what we call super connectors. We take them out of the network actually starts to fragment. It's kind of something that we'll pick up here in a minute, talk a little bit more about.
Okay, over to me. So, I don't know, is Peter shot here today? I don't think he is, I didn't see him. But Peter's a friend of mine and a great entrepreneur in this ecosystem. And he presented at 1Million Cups a couple months ago. And he put up unicorns and princesses and some pictures. And I thought, you know, if Peter could put up unicorns and princesses, I can tie them both. So I'm going to tell you about this picture. What this picture represents is the story of entrepreneurs. So traditionally, we've built these stories of entrepreneurs that make entrepreneurs appear to be these sort of lone wolf type of people. We build them into these really individual heroes that kind of think go against the grain, think differently, are really very independent and very individual people. If you think of the stories of individual entrepreneurs, that's kind of what we think about, right? Thomas Edison, for example, think of him and his individual inventions. But if you look more into the history of Thomas Edison, you'll see that really what happened there is that it was these inventions were created by teams that he had within the lab. Think of Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs had Wozniak. Think of Bill Gates. Bill Gates had Paul Allen. So really, this is an incorrect story. So this tale of the individual and that the success as an individual person really led us to try to identify who is the entrepreneur. But what's interesting about this is that this isn't the story that I think we should be telling. And this isn't the story that Fargo tells us. So if we look at Fargo and we look how entrepreneurially successful Fargo's been, it's because really you guys are a pack of wolves. You're not, it's not individual lone wolves, it's this pack that's really helping, I think, entrepreneurship to be successful. And really, new research supports that. So if we look at entrepreneurs, over 50% of entrepreneurs are actually started by teams. And if we look deeper into that, we see that those entrepreneurs that are more successful are the teams. High-techs that grow more quickly are collaborative efforts. So that's really important, and I think that the story of Fargo really reinforces that message, that entrepreneurship is actually a different tale than the tale of the lone wolf. So, just to kind of recap what we found, just briefly to give you a few takeaways. First off, so what you saw from what Josh presented, we really found that Fargo's ecosystem is really well connected. This is a very well connected network. It's a very centralized network, so it's very dense. And that's a great thing. I mean, this really only came up about in the last 5 years, right? So I think everyone that's been involved in this initiative should really pat themselves on the back because you've done a great thing. And this ecosystem, it's working, it's driving entrepreneurial activity, so that's great. What we also see in here is that there's some really important super connectors. So there's a few individuals that are very instrumental in connecting people within Fargo. And I think we all probably, can think of people that were really instrumental in connecting different people and really getting this working. What's interesting and what Josh did, so Josh is the guy that can run all those fancy network maps. I tell him, like, hey, run this. And he does it and he shows me these cool maps and I really have no clue what went into it. But what he did was he looked at what would happen if we take those key players out of the network. So what would happen if some of these key players were eliminated? Because that's a concern, right? If you think we've got these people that are connecting, and while that's great, it probably could be a problem. The good news is that the network didn't collapse when he ran that. So we have a very resilient network. So while we have connectors that are connecting people, everybody is now really connected. So this ecosystem is actually very resilient to change. There's lots of cohesion and trust. And the final thing is that if we want to think about ecosystems, this is a really good start, but what we might want to think about is this is a great start for our early stage ecosystem. So we have a great ecosystem for getting startups started. What we have to think about now is what the ecosystem needs to look at to help keep those entrepreneurs growing, and that might be a little bit of a different ecosystem. So to wrap up, success factors. This ecosystem, it's great, it's very welcoming, it's very supportive. I moved here a couple years ago from Canada, and instantly I found it really easy to get connected. So people were great at bringing me in and saying, you want to talk to so-and-so, I can connect you to them. That's a great thing. The final point we'll leave you with is we also will suggest something maybe a little more controversial. Is that maybe what we want to think about here in Fargo too, is that we need to kick people out and we need to fight more. And I'll explain why I say that. So kick people out, I of course don't mean we're not going to include people, but what's really important with ecosystems and what's really important with entrepreneurship is that we have new ideas moving through the ecosystem. So if we can send people out to develop some of those good ideas and find some of those ideas and then maybe come back, that's a great thing. And the final point, we want to fight more. This came from some of our interviews where a lot of people would say, I think this goes back to the fact that I'm Canadian, so I love it here, because we are so amazing polite. But we're still North Dakota, Minnesota nice. And while that's a great thing, sometimes for entrepreneurship we need to be challenged. And in interviews people would say, they would talk differently after. So somebody would present and you'd say everything was all great, and then it was after the fact in the parking lot that some of those, they need to think about this or they should do this. So maybe just to leave you with one, final thing to think about. Maybe we need to be a little less polite sometimes and be a little more challenging and fight a little bit more.
That's coming from a Canadian.
Yes, exactly. I'm saying that. And that was everything we had.
Awesome. Yeah, let's do that. So we'll have a few different mic runners running mics around. I think it's going to be Darby and probably Brian. Hi, Darby. So just raise your hand if you have a question for Josh or Audrey. Otherwise, you can also tweet it to #1MCFAR, F-A-R, and I can read it up here as well. But I guess one of the questions I had, what was the catalyst for this research? So what got you interested in this line of work to begin with?
Well, when I was, before my academic career, I was in the coffee industry for 14 years, and that was an entrepreneurial organization. I started there when I was 16, and so I saw the tumult, I saw the difficulties of entrepreneurial organizations, and I loved it. I loved that kind of chaos. You don't get as much in academics of that kind of thing, and I really wanted to at some point get back into it. So sitting in faculty meetings at the College of Business for my early years, they were saying, hey, isn't it great that we're downtown, we're in this business community, okay, what are we doing? It seemed like we were as engaged, and I think that's drastically changed. This was many years ago. And so I said, well, why don't I just walk a couple blocks and see what's going on? Let's find out and reconnect kind of with the entrepreneurial community. So that was the impetus for me.
I kind of tagged along. Josh had already started the project. So I came down here a couple years ago, and I did my PhD work actually was in entrepreneurship at the University of Alberta up in Edmonton. And so I've done actually a lot of work with looking at communities of entrepreneurs. So part of the reason I was talking about collaboration was I did a big project looking at Hutterite communities and communes and entrepreneurial activity within these team settings. So when I moved down here and Josh told me that he was starting this project with the ecosystem, it just really fit really well with my research interests. So
standards of the research? Is it something that is comparable or can be compared to the way that the same research is done in other ecosystems or cities?
Well, that's a great question. The field of ecosystem research is extremely new. In fact, I know of only one other study that's done this kind of research. So we want to compare. I mean, we think it would be fantastic. It's a matter of finding the opportunity in other people that have done similar things. It's sort of a state-of-the-art kind of issue where we're kind of early, but there should be opportunities. We would like to actually do either continue stuff here or a city that we can compare to. Of course, that's an expensive, long process, but yeah, we would love to do comparison.
Hi there. Tom Speedo with Super Studio here in town, but I also serve the North Dakota House of Representatives. And your answer there kind of addressed the question that I had, where I'm putting my policymaker hat on and I say, okay, this is a really nice snapshot of where we are right now. But in terms of formulating how to get to the next step and do better, can you give us kind of an understanding about how we look compared to anyone else based on any prior work that you might have done? And then on top of that, when looking at communities of our size that are kind of where we're at in our snapshot, what sort of strategies do they tend to work well to then move us up to the next step and allow us to continue to grow and be successful?
Yeah, that's a really good question. That's something we talk about quite a bit. So the other area that I'm familiar with is Hong Kong. Not that I've been there, but I did talk to a researcher who's doing similar work there, and we compared notes. And naturally, the ecosystem there could be much larger, but we both started about 2011. So the trajectory in Hong Kong, from her point of view, was that not only did they have emerging prairies, they had 10 emerging prairies, and then they had, by a factor, it was much larger. That diversity is really the key. A kind of diversity wherein you have people connecting to people that aren't connected. What that does is provides new information and new knowledge and allows people to bring ideas back into their cohesive network where they can share them and they can work on them. That pattern of innovation is really, really important. It's really key. What we have is a very nice, cohesive group. That's excellent. What we need is churn and new ideas. And so larger ecosystems can accommodate that. Because we're an ecosystem that's very well developed at this point, we have to think about what other ecosystems can we connect with and start moving ideas, moving innovation through. Did that answer your question? Okay.
No, not really. I mean, I think it's a really good question. It's what we've asked because we don't have a comparison. So what would be wonderful is if we could show what Fargo's got and say, well, look how different this is to Austin or somewhere else, right? We don't have that. So it is what we've been thinking we would love to do. Now, what goes into that is the challenge.
So this question from Twitter, from Daniel Moe, sort of fits into the last question. Is the entrepreneurial ecosystem in Fargo welcoming to all sorts of people, or do certain people benefit more? How do we make sure everyone can gain from it?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question. And so it's kind of interesting when I asked Josh to go run things, I say to him, like a couple weeks ago, I said to him, show me where the women are in the network. Because in my head, I'd already kind of built my whole analysis, right? I'm like, this is perfect. The women are going to show up on the outside. They're not going to be central. And I'm going to be able to write an amazing paper talking about marginalization of women entrepreneurs. And then he comes back into my office and he's like, there's no difference. And this blew the whole paper that I was going to write. Right?
Nobel Prize.
Yeah, done, gone. So what we found, interestingly, is that it does seem to be, quite an inclusive network, and some of the challenges that exist in other networks maybe don't exist here. Are there key players, that I think potentially depends what you mean by benefit, but like benefit more? Yeah, potentially. I think there's people more in the middle. But I think what we found was that the network is very inclusive.
I'd add on to that. So I think it's changed So it was very tech focused a few years ago, and now we have random acts of art, and the creative class is becoming kind of more integrated. And so when I look at the degree of nonprofit integration, it's quite high. And going back to the gender issue, women are no more likely to connect to women than they are to men. Men are more likely to connect to men than women. It's almost like it's not an issue, which I was really surprised. But I'm like, well, okay, let's look, and it actually is quite fascinating. I will say, going back to the other question, is that these nexus of groups, like the creative folks, the artists and the musicians and all this, they have their own networks. And as those are developed more and more, you're going to start finding more diversity in the ecosystem. So it won't just be this big clump in the middle. You'll find these nice groups that are sort of developing their own ecosystem. So I think it'd be very healthy. That just takes time, and it's almost like it's what happened in tech to happen in these other areas. Let's go.
Sorry, your idea for your paper blew up. I'm glad it did, because our community kind of shattered the preconceived notion, which is good. Let me preface my question. My name is Ken. Let me preface my question by saying that I started my business more than 30 years ago, and the dynamics were a lot different in our community then. It was sort of like, start a business, what's the matter? Can't you find a job? What's wrong with you? And so, I say I was entrepreneurial before entrepreneurial was cool. And it's so refreshing to look at where we are today. I know I sound like an old guy, I guess I kind of am, but I look back at that and I say, what things have really changed for the better in our community? So my question is, in your research, did you look at any of that, or what are the dynamics that have changed and why? And what made that happen? And then, you've had questions about the future. What does that mean going forward?
How's it changed? Well, I can't answer that completely, only what we've heard from people we've talked to. And you kind of summed it up. This idea that I talked to folks that started their business 25, 30 years ago, like, I didn't need a million cups, I didn't need all this stuff. But I think that in terms of generating new ideas, generating push towards innovation within this system, the idea is to make a place that people want to live, that people want to call their own. And some of that innovation, some of that cultural change is really aimed at, let's give the young folks a great place to live. And let's give them, stuff they can do. And that has created more staying power and built a culture of innovation. So I think that it's a cultural shift, but yeah.
Maybe just a quick follow-up then. Is it only a generational change? Because when I look around the room, I may not be the oldest guy here. Or is it also an attitudinal change, or a little bit of both?
I would say attitudinal, because I have talked to entrepreneurs who are, midlife, and they, with their jobs, you've heard the stories here, and people from Fargo, and the reason they did that is because they looked around, they said, there's a community here that will support that. So, while overall nationwide entrepreneurship actually is going down, there's not good enough numbers to know what's happening here in Fargo, but anecdotally, we see that people have told us, I took that leap because of this community there. So I think there's definitely something.
And I think you're right too. I think if you look like really broad history too, you could start to see it almost would go in a circle, right? So if we look a century ago, we had, America was very entrepreneurial, and things go back to Ford and go back to all of these really key entrepreneurs. And then we kind of went into more of the sort of bureaucratic or whatever you want to call it. Now it seems like it's shifting back again, right? So you can almost look at it as cyclical type of, yeah, that's what we say. And I think, so I think that would be really interesting. We didn't really look at that in the research, but yeah, I know what you're saying.
It has come up.
Let's go to Cal.
Hi, so I'm from North Dakota. I grew up here, but one of the things I've heard kind of anecdotally from people is that sometimes, even though we are very nice, we can be nicer to other people from the area than we always are to transplants, and you're obviously a transplant. And so my question is, did you find any differences in the cohesion or in the collaboration between people who maybe were already established in this area versus people who tried to come in later and get connected?
Sure. So, I think one of the things, so I moved from Edmonton, which is about a town of about 1 million people. Who knows where Edmonton is? I always ask my students this, and they never know, and they get in trouble. But yeah, Edmonton, so a much bigger city. But what I really noticed here was how, and I think this is really the beauty of Fargo, and I hope something we can sustain, is how there's very few degrees of separation between everyone, right? So you can, when I was in Edmonton and I would try to do research, it's really hard to get in the door of a lot of places. People won't talk to you. There's, and that didn't really exist here. Like we found doors open really easily for us, and anybody that you want to get connected to, I could send John Hotchuck an email and he could have me connected to pretty much anyone. It seems like, within the ecosystem really quickly. And I think that's really important. And I noticed as a transplant, that was really helpful. So did that answer it?
I'm a transplant too.
Yeah, right.
I'm actually from Alaska, but which actually maybe further north, how much?
We're the two people that moved here because the weather's warm.
Moving south.
Well, I don't know. I have, all I can say on that point is that I've talked to people that moved in, we did interviews with folks, and the predominant sense I get is they're like, man, I got hooked up immediately. That's usually what people say, so far, that's been our experience.
Harlinger here, CO Solutions. You mentioned something about the Hutterites, and I work with them, bought from them, all kinds of things. And I think a lot of people think that, they're a little different, they got that German accent, they dress funny, they're isolated. And yet they are probably the most progressive first adopters I've ever run into. And so my question is, do we, because we have a great center here, but do we necessarily tap into all the entrepreneurial and first adopter people that are really out there? And what did you find out about the Hutterites as a group from the entrepreneurial side? I'd be very interested.
So I just submitted a paper dealing with sort of that issue. And so what I found really interesting about the Hutterites, for some of you that maybe don't know the Hutterites, they live on communes, you'd call it, of about 150 people. They share everything communally. So they have no individual wealth. They own nothing. It's all held within the community. So a very, very different system than we're used to. And the type of system where you would expect not to produce, initially you would expect that not to produce new ideas or entrepreneurial activity. What you see within the Hutterites is that they're very, like you said, very progressive and very entrepreneurial. The communities I worked with were working on ways to filter water, solar power, feed mills, all these really interesting new ventures. And what I saw there, what happens is they have that support network, and it's so strong that they can fail, and it's not such a huge disaster for them. So they would say, I can try something. I can try a new idea. If it fails, it doesn't mean that I can't pay my mortgage, that I don't have, can't feed my family. So they kind of have this really strength, this collective system that's really driving ideas and driving their ability to be sort of those innovators like you're mentioning. And so while that's a really extreme example, I think that everyone's going to laugh when I compare Fargo to the Hutterites, but it's kind of happening in a little bit of a way here. And if you could do that even more, get that sort of really support network in place so that it allows people to fail, allows people to try new ideas. I think that's really important.
So there's 154 people in this room today, and so I was wondering, what is next for your research, and then how do we as a community, I guess, help you with that research? Because this is really important work that you folks are doing. How can we help you with that?
Count the ways. Really, I would say this. Many of you I've sat down with interviews with what's that. So thank you so far for the people that have been involved, because they took time out of their day to sit with us. So that's excellent. We might be asking for more of that in the future. The other thing that we are really interested in is measuring success. We've talked about this, and there might be opportunities where we would go to entrepreneurs currently in the ecosystem with different ways to measure success, so that we can connect the dots, so to speak, of what we see in terms of social structure and how we see it playing out. So we would like to continue that vein, and it's actually good to have that delayed a little bit, so a year out, so that we can say, make the connection. Help in terms of, academics are always looking for sponsors, always looking for funding. Kaufman supported this grant for me and on leave, and that was fantastic. It allowed us to pay for a lot of things that we don't have budgets for. So, I guess I'm sort of asking for funding. Isn't that what you're supposed to do? But it's always hopeful. I don't know how that would work. Scott, the dean over there, he's the guy to talk to that. But that's what comes to mind. Do you have anything to add?
No, I think we're kind of at the point where, we would also welcome you to engage with us if you have ideas or ways that you think or that we could take this, places that we could take this research and replicate it. We're kind of at that pause point where we've got everything we've got from Fargo. Now we're trying to figure out where do we go next and what is our next project. So we would love your feedback and welcome your suggestions on what you think would help or what would be really interesting to see us do from here.
Yeah, actually, what questions would you all like to have answered? Quite interesting.
Awesome. Well, thank you both for coming on.
Thank you.
Josh and Ollie will be available after the program, I'm sure, if you have more questions about their work, or if you want to donate to their work as well. I heard John Project down in the front row is going to get like $10,000 so yeah, $10. Okay, well that's a start right there. But before we go here, we have a few different. We always like to end the show with some gratitude because it's with a small group of people that we're able to do this up here, including some sponsors that you see behind us on the screen. So big thanks to Concordia, to Fargo-Moorhead EC, to the CBB, to all those partners that make this happen every single week. It's just we're all really grateful to be able to do that. Also, big shout out to our greeter, Roger, who's here every Wednesday morning greeting everyone. I was able to sneak past you this morning, but he's always a great big smile when you come in the room, so thank you to Roger. Thanks to our mic runners, Alex Dusa and Darby from the EP team for getting around to everybody. And thanks to Kayla from iBailey for live tweeting today. If you ever are sick or can't make it for some reason, you can always follow along on Twitter. A special thanks to Concordia College Business School for sponsoring the month of October. So without them, this wouldn't be able to happen. But we also want to kind of get you all hyped up for next week. So next week is going to be a very, very special week. It's going to be Living Legends Week. And so we're going to have Richard Solberg, who's the board of chairman of Bell Bank, and Steve Schill, chairman of the board of Shields. And they'll be presenting, and they'll actually be getting asked questions from Michael Solberg, who's Richard's son, who was named Bell Bank's president in January of 2009, and he's the CEO in 2014. And then Steve D. Schill will also be getting asked questions by Steve M. Schill, who's currently the CEO of Shields, and so I'm kind of excited about that. I used to work at Shields, so it's kind of like coming back to the mothership. But anyways, hopefully you folks will be able to make it out. It's going to be one of our largest 1Million Cups of the year. We're expecting about 400 people, so we're going to look to fill this room up to capacity, and maybe, and hopefully the fire marshal won't shut us down. But anyways, thank you all for coming out. We appreciate it, and we hope to see you next week.